Welcome. Good evening, everybody. Uh, Today, we're here to talk about nuclear power and climate change. And this is part of the National Green Party's Earth Day to May Day activities that the Eco Action Committee has been promoting. And you should check out their website for the Eco Action Committee of the National Green Party. And we picked this day because it's close to yesterday, which was the anniversary of the Chernobyl disaster. So it seems like an appropriate time. We also chose this topic because in a lot of previous podcasts, people are asking if nuclear power is a clean energy option, which we obviously don't think it is. And that's what we want to talk about tonight. So we have two great guests. One is Elie, and the other is Harvey Wasserman. Harvey's having technical difficulties. He'll get on here as soon as he figures them out. And then Marilyn is a longtime anti-nuclear activist for the last 25 years, particularly fighting the Indian Point nuclear power plants just outside of New York City. She was a co-founder of the Indian Point Safe Energy Coalition, and she was central to the movement to shut Indian Point down now. And they won. It's being shut down. So now, it's only half the battle. You got to make sure it's decommissioned as safely as possible. So she's involved in monitoring the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and Holtec, which is a New Jersey-based company that's decommissioning the Indian Point plants. And I'll give Harvey's bio before he speaks. Each of us is going to speak for about 10 minutes, and then we'll open it up to question and answers. So I wanted to start by talking about Biden's climate plan and why he can't keep his pledge to cut emissions by 50% by 2030, because the actual climate plan in his American Jobs Plan, which he rolled out on March 31st, is grossly underfunded, and the policies are counterproductive. If you break down the 2.3 trillion in the whole proposal to the actual climate actions, it only spends about $100 billion a year on climate action. And that contrasts with what a lot of the environmental movement is proposing. They have a thing called the Thrive Agenda. There's a Green New Deal network, groups like Sunrise and Sierra Club. They want $10 trillion over 10 years. But unfortunately, like the Biden plan, it's mostly paying corporations to do the work and relying on them. And Biden's plan in particular is full of corporate welfare, tax credits, subsidies, contracts for these big businesses. And in contrast to Biden's 2.3 trillion and the Thrive Agenda 10 trillion, Bernie Sanders proposed 16.3 trillion over 10 years in his campaign. And the goal was 100% clean power by 2030 and economy-wide zero emissions by 2050. And Sanders also did a lot of it through the public sector, including power, mass transit, and high-speed rail, broadband, public housing, and even public farmland to keep farms out of the corporate hands and in the farmers' hands. So you could really make the transition to organic, regenerative agriculture. And we think Sanders' numbers were right. His timeline was too slow. Our eco-socialist Green New Deal, which put forward 27.5 trillion over 10 years to get to zero emissions and 100% clean energy by 2030. And we went sector by sector and figured out what it would cost to build the new green machinery and technologies to zero out emissions in power, transportation. And we particularly emphasized manufacturing, which isn't talked about enough. And we wanted green machinery produced by publicly owned worker-managed cooperative factories for a clean-powered and zero-waste industrial sector. So we're not extracting so much from the earth and putting so much back as waste. So the Biden plan is grossly underfunded, and it's also counterproductive because he puts forward what he calls, and what the corporate interests have been advocating, a clean energy standard instead of a renewable portfolio standard, which 30 states, DC, and 4 US territories have put forward. The renewable portfolio standards, with few exceptions, go with clean renewables: wind, solar, wave, hydro, and geothermal. What Biden does and what these corporate interests have been pushing is add to the clean energy standard what they call clean energy, and it's not: fossil fuels with carbon capture and storage, waste incinerators, industrialized monocrop biofuel plantations, and what we're going to talk about tonight, so-called advanced nuclear. So it's really a plan for burning more fossil fuels. It doesn't ban fracking and new fossil fuel infrastructure like the Dakota Access Pipeline and Enbridge Line 3, which Biden could stop now by executive order, but has not. He had an opportunity a couple of weeks ago on Line 3 because that's they're working on a construction while there's an environmental review going on that the courts ordered, but he didn't stop it. So that's a problem. And then there's a trick in this whole thing called net zero. And the trick is they want to be able to burn fossil fuels and offset it with carbon capture and storage, which is not economically viable, and tree plantations that, bring carbon down. But if it's not done the right way, that could set up another colonial land grab in the global South. So I've detailed an analysis of Biden's plan that's a disaster, and it's coming out in Counterpunch this week, where I deal with carbon capture and storage, biofuels, waste incinerators, and above all, how far short Biden's actual climate plan investments are short of what's needed for clean power, transportation, manufacturing, buildings, agriculture, and for the climate debt the U.S. owes to the global South for environmental justice and climate safety. But what we want to focus on here is nukes. So I'm going to say a few words about that in the Biden plan. I mean, in general, nuclear power is dirty, dangerous, and uneconomical. They're dirty. They always leak radiation. The process of getting uranium dug out of the ground and processed is dirty. They're dangerous. We've seen disastrous accidents, Chernobyl, Fukushima, and very close calls in many other cases that could have been just as bad. And that's becoming more likely as these plants age and the radiation embrittles the metal in these plants, making them more vulnerable to catastrophic accidents. And our nukes are, on average, 40 years old. Some of them have got permission to go for 60 years from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which is really the Nuclear Rubber Stamp Commission. And some are applying for 80 years. There's even an application for 100 years, which is just inviting a disaster. And it's uneconomical because it requires subsidies. We have the Price-Anderson Act, which is supposed to compensate for the fact that private insurance won't fully insure these nuclear power plants. They're still not fully insured. So you're going to be liable if there's a nuclear accident in your neighborhood for the damages it does to your property. Cost overruns and construction delays. That's been a long-time problem with nukes. Coming out of the Obama-Biden administration, they gave loan guarantees to 4 new nukes in South Carolina and Georgia. Those in South Carolina have been stopped because of cost overruns and construction delays. And the ones in Vogel, Georgia, they keep throwing money down that hole. It was budgeted at $14 billion. It's now $28 billion. And it's only happening because Brian Kemp was able to steal the election from Stacey Abrams. And he's a creature of Georgia Power and the Southern Company. So these are not economical. There's the world's largest asset manager been following this and puts out a report every year. Nuclear power is 2 to 3 times more expensive than most forms of wind and solar, which is why the big guys are not investing in nuclear without, government guarantees. They're investing in renewables. And then, Biden calls this stuff, these new nuclear power plants, advanced, quote unquote. And what they really mean are small modular reactors and thorium reactors. These aren't advanced, they're old. The nuclear industry tried to develop these forms of nuclear power from the 1940s to the 1980s, and they failed. And we had some near real disasters with some of these small nuclear reactors. And the Union of Concerned Scientists came out with a study last month anticipating Biden's plan, saying it was titled, quote, advanced is not always better. And they pointed out that the small modular reactors are less economical because you don't get the economies of scale you get with the big reactors. They are still subject to terrorism and nuclear proliferation. They still produce the waste that has to be stored for hundreds of thousands of years. So the question becomes, why the hell is Biden pushing nuclear power? There's no rational reason from the viewpoint of economics or climate safety. And the only thing I can think of is he's paying off donors and big industries. He's the only presidential candidate to get donations from the employees of the Nuclear Energy Institute. That institute's PAC has given big donations to Democratic leaders like Majority Leader James Clyburn, Majority Whip Steny Hoyer, and Paul Tonko and Mike Doyle, who chair subcommittees of the Commerce and Energy Committee that deal with nuclear power and energy. So this may be payback. And then you have big corporations like General Electric, which is involved in a lot of industries in addition to nukes. So the answer may be that Biden is answering the corporate donor class rather than the climate science, the climate movement, and the public who wants clean energy. We know that from the polls. So that's where we come in and can make a real difference. So I'm gonna stop there. And I already introduced Marilyn. So why don't you go for 10 minutes, Marilyn, and then I'll introduce Harvey and we'll get his thoughts and then we'll go to question and answer.
Good. I'll look forward to some of the questions from your viewers. Thank you for having me. It's a particularly interesting time here in New York with Indian Point because we have a closing date coming up, April 30th, for the last reactor. And it's been long. It's been a lot of work. It's been a lot of activism. But I do want to say it is also a lot of pain for that reactor community. So we're not really celebrating, but we are certainly noting and thinking that it is a good thing that we'll all be healthier for. The community, the reactor community in Buchanan's getting a lot of help. They're getting a lot of money. People who worked at the plant have been kept on for decommissioning and offered jobs in other energy plants. But what I really want to make sure everybody understands is that this was a business decision. It was a business decision on the part of the company because they could not sell electricity from their nuclear generators at enough of a profit. They wanted $2 million a day. They only got $1 million a day. So that's what closes nuclear power plants if they don't get subsidies from the state and from taxpayers and don't get propped up by your tax dollars and mine. And that's the thing to really watch out for. But I did want to really be clear on the fact that it's all business. It's business, and it's I guess payback, like you were talking about too, Howie. Who contributes and who gets heard are frequently the same people. So in regard to the closing agreement, New York really did get a strong closing agreement. We worked for 3 years for a DOB, a Decommissioning Oversight Board, and at the last minute, the governor threw that to the Public Service Commission, so that's still sort of pending. However, the Public Service Commission has established its authority over Holtec and what's going on. They were pushing very hard to keep the PSC out because that is that's a pretty strong authority and a pretty strong oversight. So we will have state agencies and we will have the state very involved in the decommissioning oversight. There'll be a project meeting, which I thought was great, once a month with with Holtec. Now, Holtec is a really crooked company. I could go into the details, but that's kind of boring. So I'll just say we've worked very hard to get somebody else to decommission and could not. The option was to go into safe store and just let the plant sit there. Nobody wanted to do that. So we have this decommissioning company, Holtec, that's coming out in a much stronger position than they went into the argument. I think we did well. Our negotiators were good, but Holtec also came out with this patina of respectability, which they do not deserve, but they now have it. And what they're pushing for in Congress is to change the law. They have a piece of property in New Mexico, and they want to use that for CIS, they call it, centralized interim storage. And we're fighting that as tooth and nail. People of New Mexico do not want it. If you talk to anybody there, the governor on town, they don't want our nuclear waste. But Holtec wants to sell themselves as, oh, we can take this and get it out of the way. We can make your waste go away. So they're looking for more nuclear plants to decommission, and this is a big selling point for them. So this is a battle, and it really is a battle that's going on in Congress right now. Do we keep our nuclear waste law intact, which says that you cannot have interim storage until you have a permanent storage facility, or do we change the rules and change the law to accommodate this company? And right now it's a toss-up. My crystal ball doesn't tell me how this is going to come out. It really needs a lot of people talking to a lot of elected representatives. The one bipartisan issue that seems to be in this Congress is nuclear power. And I think it's because our elected representatives have, they've been sold a bill of goods by the tremendous number of lobbyists in D.C., but also they're looking at it in a very superficial way. And they're just saying, oh, carbon reduction, carbon free. Well, and Harvey knows, and probably a lot of people on this podcast right now are listening know that nukes are not carbon free. Nothing is carbon free. If you manufacture it, it's got a carbon footprint. So there's no such thing as carbon free. And I think Amory Lovins has the best take on this whole thing. And I really listen to him a lot because he's brilliant, and he makes a lot of money helping people be friendlier to the earth. He's Rocky Mountain Institute. If you haven't seen that, go to their website. There's a you'll see in the chat in a minute something on climate change. But the take on nukes and climate change is that it's a false solution, and it's false for two reasons: time and money. We have no time. Our time is used up. So we have no time, and we need the shortest time. We need generation. If we do need more generation, we need generation with the shortest time to implement as possible. Wind and solar can go up very quickly. Nuclear, no. How many years behind schedule is Vogtle? I don't know, 12 maybe? We don't have that time to waste. And it's not different with the small modular reactors. The small modular reactors are just, well, let me put it this way. If you have a dog, you might have a Great Dane. If you might have a Chihuahua, whatever you have, you still have waste to clean up. It's unavoidable. And it's not different with these so-called small modular reactors. And the trick that the industry is trying to pull is that, well, we'll just put in one and it's small, under 350 megawatts, but you can always put another one if you need more. And I think what we're really fighting here is the myth, common knowledge, conventional knowledge, that we need more and more electricity. We don't. Where electricity use in New York has gone down, and the New York Independent Systems Operator is not seeing it go up because of electric cars. That's because we've become so much more efficient. It's because we have demand response where big users cut back if they need to, and the system can use that. It's because of conservation. It's because of efficiency. So we're getting more work out of less electricity. So we don't need more and more, and you don't have to if something goes offline, like Indian Point for 1,000 megawatts, you don't have to replace 1,000 megawatts. We don't need it. We can improve our transmission. We can bring in other sources. And we're really getting ready in New York to go in a big way into offshore wind. So that's the time factor. We don't have time to waste. We can't fool around with something that is problematic at best. And I'm being charitable there. The other thing is money. Nuclear power comes in at more per megawatt hour than almost any other kind of generation. Wind and solar are cheaper. And why wouldn't we want to use the quickest, cheapest generation possible so that we can have a carbon-free grid? So I can stop there. And I think I probably used up my 10 minutes. So I can stop there and just say that the time and money factor are the two big deals. I will say one more thing. Frequently, when a nuclear power plant is going to close, the company makes a big crisis out of it. They don't, so that there's no real time to plan ahead. It's a big crisis. It becomes a job issue. And my take on that is that nuclear power plants generate electricity. Jobs are incidental. But of course, that's not the way that the people who live in those reactor communities and the people that hold those jobs feel about it. So they think that their jobs should be supported and should be subsidized, and the nuclear plants continue to run so they can continue their livelihood. So there needs to be more of a dialogue with people who are in these reactor communities, and they need to have help. It's a big upset. I totally understand that. But you can't keep a nuclear power plant running in order to provide a livelihood. Give those people direct subsidies. Subsidize them rather than subsidize the nuclear power plant. So that's the dialogue that's going to be going on, I think, as more and more plants across this country close. And hopefully enough people get smart, like the people in Ohio hopefully will do, and not go for these subsidies to keep these, I'm going to say, crooked politicians and energy generators going. We don't need that. We need to be clean, we need to be green, and we need to be renewable. Oh, so it's time and money. Those are the two things if you're talking to somebody who's all gung-ho on nuclear power, remember those 2 points. It takes too long and it's too costly. And don't let them fool you with carbon-free, because it's not. Thank you, Howie.
All right. Thank you, Marilyn. And welcome, Harvey. I've known Harvey since we were both involved in forming the Clamshell Alliance in 1976 to fight nuclear power at the Seabrook Station and across New England. And he's been deeply involved ever since in the anti-nuclear movement. He's been a senior advisor on nuclear power to Greenpeace, Nuclear Information and Resource Service. And actually, the Green Party is the shadow cabinet secretary of energy that we set up in about 10 years ago. He's written 20 books and countless articles. He has one out today called 80 Ways Nuke Power is a Catastrophic Failure. You can find that on reader-supported news. I actually saw a picture of Harvey before I met him, because it was on the cover of a book called Harvey Wasserman's History of the United States, which I recommend people read. It was a people's history before Howard Zinn's people's history. In fact, Howard Zinn wrote the introduction to it. Harvey's been involved in other things like the election integrity. He worked with the Green Party in 2004 in Ohio, right through to the 2016 fallout in Wisconsin and other states. 20 books, I won't list them all. Solartopia is a great book, I think, visionary. He's got another history that I think it's a new edition of a book called Cycles of American History coming out, which I think is a good read because the cycle's coming our way in Harvey's view. He hosts 2 radio shows, Green Power and Wellness on the Progressive Radio Network and California Solartopia on KPFK, Pacifica radio station in Los Angeles. And I'll stop there, go to solartopia.org, and there's a lot of good stuff on there. So Harvey, thanks for being here.
Hey, Howie, it's great. Thanks for your patience on the computer issues. Nothing drives me crazier than computer stuff. I'm really glad to be with you, and I'm honored. And Howie, I'm thrilled to have you on our weekly Monday Zoom call on election protection. Anybody wants to join us, it's 5 p.m. Eastern time on Monday. Go to electionprotection2024.org and get the link, or write me at solartopia@gmail.com. and you can join us. And I want to give a huge shout out to Marilyn. Marilyn, your groups in New York, just incredibly persistent and powerful.
That's true.
And the victory in shutting Indian Point is tangible. It's huge, and you've saved millions of lives because eventually those reactors, one of them was going to blow up. So, to put things in perspective, my piece today lists, there's actually more than 80 ways that nuke power has been a catastrophe. And we're talking today on the day after the anniversary of the Chernobyl catastrophe. And if anybody ever doubts, if you have a friend who's giving you grief about nuclear power, you need to see, and need to have them see, the 5-part series done by HBO on Chernobyl. It is the most devastating thing you will ever see, bar none, on television or in the movie theater. And I recommend that you go. It's HBO. You go to HBO. You get this 5-part series, and my recommendation is that you start it in the morning and watch it straight through. About 5, 6, 7 hours, but that's the only way to see it. I made the mistake of watching it over 3 days. I didn't sleep for 3 nights. This is and to really understand nuclear power, you got to understand Chernobyl, and this series really does it. It's Chernobyl at HBO. Now, in my mind, the most significant issue in nuclear power is not the future reactors that they're talking about in the Biden plan. They're talking about fusion, they're talking about thorium, they're talking about small reactors, who knows what else. There are no prototypes of any other reactors that indicate that any of them can compete with solar, wind, batteries, and increased efficiency. The renewable revolution is one of the most, if not the most significant technological advance in human history. When Howie and I started fighting nukes back in the 70s, people said, well, what are you going to do for the power? We said, no, wind, solar. We were guessing basically, and we were hoping. And if you had charted out at the time as a theoretical what actually did happen with solar and wind, nobody would believe you. It is one of the most astounding breakthrough technological revolutions in human history. The efficiency of solar and wind has gone straight up, whereas nuclear has gone straight down. So they're playing around with these so-called advanced reactors. None of them is going to pan out. They're all going to be disasters. They're all going to take years and years and years and double, triple, quadruple the original cost estimates. Vogtle in Georgia is coming in right now at $28 billion. Nobody thinks it's going to be less than $30 billion. That's more than double the original cost estimate. It won't work. If you opened it right now under optimal circumstances, its rates would be double or triple available solar and wind. So my most fervent hope and the number one agenda on the nuclear power issue is the 93 reactors that are operating now, because every one of them is capable of blowing up and melting down as we're talking. We're speaking here in comfortable surroundings, and Diablo Canyon or Davis-Besse or Fort Calhoun or South Texas, any one of these reactors could be having a major catastrophe. The greatest miracle in our lives will be if we get through the shutdown of these available nuclear 93 reactors without one of them blowing up. There's 440 worldwide. As Howie said, the average age of an American reactor now is 40 years. These reactors, especially the oldest of them all, which is 9 Mile Point on Lake Ontario in northern New York, that reactor opened in 1969, for God's sakes. Who among you is driving a 52-year-old automobile? Those reactors, almost all the reactors in the United States were designed pre-digital. They didn't even have computers applying to them. And anybody who says they're in favor of nuclear power, you say that your responsibility is to step forward and attest to the safety of each and every reactor that's continuing to operate. That's why the shutdown of Indian Point is so incredibly significant. I mean, you'll remember that Andrew Cuomo, not my favorite guy, characterized the escape plan, the evacuation plan for Indian Point as, quote, swim to New Jersey, unquote.
He did. Yes, he did do that.
There's no possible evacuation plan that will work for any atomic power plant in the United States or probably anywhere else in the world. And we have significant issues with cooling water. We have significant issues with embrittlement. At least half the reactors in the United States are embrittled, which means they'll shatter if you pour in water to cool down a meltdown. The problems with atomic reactors that are now operating are endless. And we've got 93 basically swords of Damocles holding by a thin string over the entire country. This country economically will not survive an explosion at a nuclear plant. And you know, when Howie and I started, we had to cool it. We couldn't go out and say, oh, a nuclear plant's going to explode, because the industry came forward quite convincingly and said it's structurally impossible for any American reactor to blow up. Well, we just had 4 of them blow up at Fukushima 10 years ago. They just flat out exploded. There were hydrogen explosions. We did have a small hydrogen explosion, by the way, at 3 Mile Island. Thank God it wasn't bigger. But, you know, 4 reactors, American reactors, blew up at Fukushima. And it could happen to any American reactor in the right now operating. So we will stop. You heard it here first. They will not build a significant number of fusion reactors or thorium reactors or small reactors. They're going to play around. They might get a couple of prototypes. They'll throw billions of dollars of our money. They won't be insured, and they will fail. There is no way that any reactor, any theoretical reactor, can come online within the next 10 years and come anywhere close to competing with wind and solar.
That's true.
So, you know, Bill Gates, he wants to throw our money with, you know, a few pennies of his at whatever whatever they're talking about, their company. They'll do it. They'll waste our money. They'll waste our time. But they will not put in a new generation of reactors. There are 0 reactors under construction in the United States today, except for the 2 at Vogtle in Georgia, and they are pre-failed. So the bottom line is this. My concern, all of our concerns, primary, has to be with the operating reactors, because they are incredibly dangerous. They are old. They are not regulated in any meaningful way. When you watch the Chernobyl series, you see these Soviet so-called regulators. Our regulators are no better. Those guys over there at Chernobyl, they did everything they could to hide the true impacts of the reactor. And you know what? A lot of them died from the radiation that they said was not harmful. So in this country, we have a completely corrupt Nuclear Regulatory Commission. The really bad news is that Biden put a really bad guy as the new chairman of the NRC. He's a Democrat, but he's horrible, terrible. We got a former chairman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, Greg Yasko, another commissioner, Peter Bradford, running around telling the country, hey, these reactors got to shut. And that's what we got to do. So our focus, we have won the battle for renewables, an industry that didn't exist when Howie and I started fighting nukes. We have given birth to. The left, the Greens, the no nukes, we can take very substantial credit for creating or helping to create the multi-trillion-dollar industry that is wind, solar, batteries, and efficiency. What we got to do now, number one, and everything else is 10 and under. Number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 93 is to shut these reactors. So thank you so much at Indian Point. I mean, what you've done is magnificent. Everybody has to study what was done at Indian Point so we get these other reactors shut. We know that they all got to be subsidized. I mean, while on the one hand, Cuomo pushed the shutdown of, or whatever he did for the shutdown of Indian Point, on the other hand, he got $7 billion to subsidize the other 4 reactors in New York.
Yes, yes, you did.
So we got to go at these subsidies. We got to go find every way, non-violently, legally, we possibly can to shut these 93 reactors. And the good news is we have the alternatives. General Electric, which has built the Fukushima reactors, for God's sakes, now has a 13 megawatt offshore windmill that's 2/3 the height of the Empire State Building. So, we're entering a whole new world of renewable energy where everything is possible. And our job is to get these reactors shut. And, I can list you within our lifetimes, 30, 40 reactors that we already have shut. Some of them were operating. Most of them were in advanced stages of planning. But we got to get the ones down now that are up there. So thank you so much for this, Howie and Marilyn, and let's just shut them down.
Amen.
Thanks, Harvey. So let's open it up for questions. Rob D. Rich asks, is there anything useful that can come from nuclear waste?
No.
No.
Hell no.
Yeah, you got to store it for hundreds of thousands of years, isolated.
Right. And, what's his name? A great engineer, Arnie Gunderson, says the nuclear industry is telling us that we can't store electricity overnight, but we know how to store plutonium for 250,000 years.
That's Arnie.
Insane.
That's Arnie. Yes, that's Arnie.
So no, nothing good can come from nuclear waste.
Jean Louis Pascalides asks, what does AOC say about nukes?
That is not clear.
She said she was open to it.
Yes, and she just had a town hall last Friday that I thought nukes would come up then, but my chat was disabled, so I couldn't put the question in. But I did call her office. I did ask for clarification on that, and I think she still needs to be educated some more. So we've been trying to reach out to her. Nothing definitive yet is the best answer I know to that.
Yeah, unfortunately, AOC and Markey took the Green Party's Green New Deal, watered it down, and introduced it as a non-binding resolution to the Congress. And they eliminated from our Green New Deal the ban on fracking and new fossil fuel infrastructure, the shutdown of nuclear power, the transfer of money and brain power from military spending to a Green New Deal, and extended the deadline to zero emissions to 2050, which they called net zero.
Right.
Which, like I talked about before, is a trick. So these folks need some education and some pressure, because no doubt they're getting pressure from the other side. The Democratic Party, they got a resolution passed in June, the Democratic National Committee in June 2018, against taking money from the fossil fuel industry. Christine Pelosi snuck that in. It's Nancy's daughter. And by August, they changed that. They said, oh no, we'll take that money and we are recommitting to all of the above energy policy, which was the Obama policy, which fracked the hell out of the country, made us the world's biggest oil and gas producers, and tried to build nuclear power plants with loan guarantees. So that they're getting pressure from that side. And we got to apply some pressure from our side. Saul Oyas. What's a good alternative to Japan tossing radioactive water in the ocean?
They're going to have to keep storing it.
Yep.
I mean, there's no alternative. You're going to have to keep building tanks and tanks and tanks. You're going to have to call off the Japan Olympics, by the way. There are radioactive hotspots all over Japan. And it's criminally irresponsible to continue with the Olympics because, radiation doesn't spread out nice and even. It comes down in clumps, and they've discovered hot spots all far away as Tokyo. which is 180 kilometers. So, there's no alternative. There's no good alternative. They just got to keep building more tank farms.
There's no safe alternative. It's like any other kind of nuclear waste. There's no good way. You just
Right.
have to isolate it and keep it out of the environment. But I would recommend to the listeners, Bo Jacobs, who is a professor at the University of Tokyo. He was hired. He moved there from the United States, and he gave the best speech on ionizing radiation that I have ever heard. And the way he explained it, and the way you can ingest particles and have them inside your body just as constant emitters, makes it real clear where a lot of cancers come from, and no way to trace it back to that original ingestion of a radioactive particle. But I heartily recommend Bo Jacobs and his talk on ionizing radiation, because it made me think about the Tokyo Olympics. And I no way nobody should be going there. And
No.
and he talked about how those people are living with this level of radiation, and it's not easy. It's just not easy, and it's not safe.
Right. If you get a chance to go to Japan, don't go.
Right.
Same as Chernobyl. Don't go anywhere near Chernobyl. People go there. It's become a tourist destination.
Yes, it has. It has.
And I gotta tell you, I interviewed people. I went to central Pennsylvania in January of 1980, about 9 months after the accident. And the industry is still saying that nobody was harmed there. It's an incredible lie.
Yes,
I sat there for 10 days interviewing people in their houses. There was a epidemiological study done of a neighborhood with 500 houses in it. People died in droves at 3 Mile Hour, as did farm animals and trees and vegetables. I mean, it was a major catastrophe. Don't let anybody ever tell you that nobody died at 3 Mile Hour. Chernobyl killed about 1 million people, by the way. And we don't know. Fukushima has emitted more than 100 times more radiation than Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Yeah.
Cesium in particular. So, this is serious stuff.
Garrett Brown, does anyone know how many plants we have here that are past their expiration dates? And how can we pressure them to be shut down?
Well, I will use an example from Indian Point. Indian Point Unit 2 was way past its expiration date, and they just got a pass from the NRC because all of the legal work and everything was still in process. But they were supposed to have a plant has to put in a request for an extension of license 5 years before it's due. And if they do that, then no matter what happens, they can keep operating until even if it's after the 5 years, as it was with Unit 2. So it's not like they have an expiration date, because all they need is an exemption from, as you said, Howie, the Nuclear Rubber Stamp Commission, and that's what we have.
And you got to remember, a lot of these reactors, about half of them are embrittled. And embrittlement is a known factor, but the 2 reactors at Diablo Canyon at San Luis Obispo, California, which, if God forbid they blow up, will send a radioactive cloud into Los Angeles. We circulate a petition in LA signed by over 2,000 people, including Jane Fonda, Martin Sheen, Lily Tomlin, Eric Roberts, Ed Asner, a whole Hollywood A-list. And the governors just blew us off. And all they have to do, it wouldn't even cost them $1 million to go in and check for embrittlement, and they don't want to do it. Which means that, we know Unit 1 is embrittled. So if, God forbid, embrittlement means that the metals in the internals of the reactor lose their plasticity and resilience. So if, God forbid, there's a meltdown and you pour in the water, instead of holding, the metal's just going to shatter. And that means you're going to have a hydrogen explosion and maybe a fission. And the governor, when they're shut, you can do it. You can go in and test. When they shut for refueling, it's a very simple thing to go in and test for embrittlement. They won't do it. It's outrageous.
Z. Kramer asks, does anyone in Congress currently oppose nuclear energy?
Well, Markey does.
Markey, yeah.
Yeah. And Bernie probably.
Yes, I think so.
But not shipping nuclear waste down to New Mexico from Vermont. Well, Bernie took that position.
No, they were going to go. That was going to go to Texas.
Okay, Texas.
But I don't know where he stands on it now.
Yeah.
Hopefully, he's learned a thing. Well, he did turn around and support shutting Vermont Yankee at the end there, but it took some doing.
Yeah.
Markey
on
has
the House
friends.
side, on the House side, I'm sure there are a few, but I don't know. I don't know for sure the names.
Mondaire Jones, he just replaced Nita Lowy, who was a longtime representative from my district. And Mondaire really knows, he understands about Indian Point and clean energy and green energy. And he has, I think he's working with some other House members.
Good. We hope.
Joshua Mast, how can we lower the price of renewable energy storage?
Buy more batteries. We do. There is a major challenge with batteries. I mean, we've got to figure out how to replace lithium. Lithium is a problem. And of course, all the opponents of renewables immediately start yapping about lithium. And the conditions under which lithium is mined are not good. So that's what we got to do. We got to keep pushing. But batteries have pretty much followed the same incredible curve of improvement as renewables. It's been quite astounding, actually. And batteries, of course, are the key to electric cars. And I want to say, by the way, one of the reasons there will not be this huge boom in demand for electricity because of electric cars is that they are so incredibly efficient.
Right.
An electric car uses a quarter of the energy as a gas car. And so, yes, there will be kind of a bump, but it's not going to be enormous.
That's exactly what the New York ISO says. And they don't see a problem at all in accommodating that.
Right. So, and there's other forms of renewable energy storage, but batteries are the key, and they are really moving ahead.
Well, I haven't studied the issue enough to feel like I can talk about it with confidence, but I have read. I'm going to go back to my guru, Amory Lovins. He's not convinced that battery storage is the key. He thinks that we can do it with distributed generation, so that you've got quick on and quick off, and transmission too. Improving transmission is part of that. So.
Right.
Maybe batteries, yes, and maybe no. The ISO they're not keen on batteries. They are putting in one big battery operated storage unit, but I think they're mostly experimenting with it.
Right.
They're not in New York. They're not pushing it.
Well, there's two big keys that are worth mentioning, slipping in here. Number one is rooftop versus, desert solar. And we really want rooftop solar. I have read, I'm not sure it's 100% accurate, that there's 3,000 square miles of rooftops that could be used in the United States for solar panels. And that's the key, because you don't lose anything in transmission, and which is a big deal. You lose a quarter or more in transmission, but if you have the panels on the rooftop, you don't lose anything. That's a big deal. We've also just seen, and this is a biggie, is that they're finally talking, and a friend of mine had this idea decades ago, of putting solar panels on aqueducts and reservoirs, especially in hot places which are sunny. If you float, and they've done this in China, if you cover a reservoir with floating solar panels, you cut down evaporation by 30 to 40%. And in addition to that, and solar panels actually work better when they're cooled. That's why Colorado is perfect for solar, because you have 300 days of sun, and also it's cold. And that, every rooftop in the world should be covered with solar panels, either for electricity or for hot water. But you will see more and more, I think, solar panels being floated, especially on the California aqueduct, where we're having terrible problems with water shortages. If they can cover the aqueduct and the reservoirs with solar panels, make a big difference.
The other thing about rooftop solar, at least in New York, it depends on where you are. Here's a place activists really need to work and understand what's going on in their own state government, because there's a lot of resistance from the utilities. But our rooftop solar is behind the meter. And so it's not, it brings down the curve of what we need and how much electricity we use, but they're still figuring out a way to measure how much electricity is being produced by all of this rooftop solar. A lot of people in New York are going solar because the state gave such good subsidies. So we need, according to the curve of usage, less and less and less. It brings down the curve and everybody gets the benefit.
Yeah, and bringing down the curve is critical. And you keep hearing these industry guys. I mean, I heard Fareed Zakaria the other night give the absolutely dumbest attack on solar, saying, "Oh, as if he just discovered that the sun doesn't shine at night and the wind sometimes doesn't blow." I mean, what a brilliant scientist he must be to have figured that out. So, someone is here is asking about the range issue on electric cars. Yes. That's inseparable from the battery issue. I mean, you're seeing the range going straight up on electric cars, and it's all got to do with batteries. And the electric refilling stations, I guess we call them, it's starting to happen. I mean, there's infrastructure now, money now being set aside in California, and it's a solvable problem. It's nothing compared to nuclear waste,
For sure.
Phil Limbo asks, we're just a battery trailer away from being able to deal with those distances. Although if put some serious money into light rail, you wouldn't need to.
Well, I agree with that in general, but in California, Jerry Brown, I think, made a terrible mistake. He committed $60 billion, for God's sakes, to build light rail between LA and San Francisco. If he had just taken that money instead and committed to make California totally energy self-sufficient in renewables, that would have been a better deal. And include in that package, the infrastructure for electric cars. I think that's a much better investment. I'm a big believer in light rail, but I think before light rail, we need to go rooftop solar.
Well, it doesn't have to be a before or after. We're not dealing with things in a sequential order here. There's no reason, because some things work in one place and some things not in another. So we really need to be highly flexible and know that it's the small distributed generation systems that our communities can set up and have, so that they have local generation. So even if the whole web goes down, the whole grid goes down, they still have some power there. So there's no either or. It's people looking very thoughtfully and very carefully at what works in a particular situation, and all of that coming together with an integrated grid.
We do need to electrify rails, freight rails, high speed between cities, and
definitely
mass transit. But I agree with Harvey that you first need to push out the renewables. Then when you electrify, you're not burning fossil fuels to provide the electricity. And the ironic thing is, when they burn diesel in a diesel electric motor, they use the diesel to turn a generator for an electric motor. The train is actually powered by electric motors. And they've been doing that for a century.
Right.
All we need to do is provide a way to get the electricity to the trains. And when they built the Northern Pacific over the Rockies, they realized the internal combustion engine wasn't strong enough. So they actually used hydro and electric wires to power those electric diesels over the Rockies 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, you got to remember also that we're starting to look at self-driving cars. And I know that and trucks, more important than self-driving cars are self-driving trucks. And I know everybody's nervous about that. I would prefer to be on a highway with computer-driven automobiles than human-driven automobiles, frankly. So we'll see that one. You probably haven't heard this first, but I'm going to tell you in 10 years, you will not be able to buy a new internal combustion car. They are done. And the self-drive thing, I think, is going to come on pretty quick as well. I would rather have a car driven by a computer than by me, frankly. So, we'll see.
Eric Gray asks, any ideas on how to turn something problematic like the red tide in Florida, that's algae, into renewable energy?
There's been talk of that. There's been work on algae. Collecting. I once had to clean out a little bay with algae. That stuff's hard to deal with.
Yes, it is.
But it could be done. There's no doubt. Absolutely.
Well, the algae that they're dealing with, I think, is different from the red tide, which is really poisonous.
Yeah.
I think the thing to do is to look at the circumstances that come together to influence that and work on a healthier bay or wherever it is that the red tide flourishes. How can that be changed? That red tide is not the mark of a healthy ecosystem.
No, it's not.
Yeah, you don't want to be dependent on poisonous algae as your energy source.
That's true.
Right.
Phil Limbo, where do geothermal and heat pumps fit into the mix of solutions we have available?
That's a good question. People haven't been talking much about the geothermal. They have managed to make it ecologically and spiritually objectionable in Hawaii, where they wanted to do geothermal right in the middle of an area that was sacred to the native Hawaiians, heat pumps, I think, are a no-brainer. They're very useful, as far as I know. But we haven't been hearing much about geothermal.
Well, and geothermal also is geothermal heat pumps, where you use the heat in the earth.
Yeah.
So, they come together. The geothermal from formations where you've got, steam geysers, that kind of thing, you can only do in selected sites, or unless you drill real deep. And they're trying to do that as well. But
it's incredibly hot, not that far down.
Yeah.
So, we'll see.
And as part of the mix, once you do that, you have what do they call it? The constant power rather than the intermittent power, wind and solar.
Right.
So that fits into the mix.
Yeah, I got to say one comment on this intermittent issue. Nuclear power plants are very vulnerable to the weather. We've had nukes shut by tornadoes, by flooding in Nebraska, earthquakes, of course. And the big one now is that there are serious water issues with cooling nuclear plants. And they have had over the past few years in France to shut nuclear plants in the summer because the rivers are too hot to cool them.
Mm-hmm.
So, how is that a cure for global warming? And the other thing that really just, how do you make the leap that nuclear power helps us fight global warming when a nuclear power plant is a radioactive fire that burns at 571 degrees Fahrenheit? How do you cool the planet with a fire burning at 570 degrees Fahrenheit? Makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And the other thing is, they scream and moan about the bird kills at the windmills. And I just read, and it's very interesting, nearly all big windmills are 3 blades into the wind. And we have had a problem with bird kill, there's no doubt. The first windmills at Altamont Pass in California should never have been built. They were 50 kilowatts. They had lattice work towers so the birds would perch, and the windmills were going real fast. So they killed tons of birds. Should never happen. To his credit, Jerry Brown, when he came in the second time for his second 2-term deal, one of the first things he did was take down the windmills at the Altamont Pass, and they were replaced with monopole so that the birds can't perch, bigger windmills. Now what they found is if you have a big commercial windmill with 3 blades, if you paint one of the blades black, the bird kill goes down almost 60%. Because the birds apparently, if you got this white swirling thing, they can't see it, they fly into them. But if one of the blades is black, they can see it.
Huh.
So this has been tried in Denmark, and it works. And what we need to do in the U.S. is stop every windmill and get somebody up there and paint one of the blades black.
And to be just really careful with where they're sited.
Right.
The migration patterns of birds are really well known, and it needs care, and it must be exercised. Oh,
Sandy,
West Valley.
Prisbillic, I live near the West Valley Demonstration Project, which has been decommissioned as a reprocessing site. This is near Buffalo, but still has radioactive waste on site in an unstable underground site that, if breached, could contaminate waterways through the Cattaraugus, that's a Seneca reservation, and travel right out into Lake Erie.
Yeah, it sure could.
Yeah.
I once spoke with an engineer who worked at West Valley, and he took that as his first job. And he said, well, he'd work there a while and then he'd go on to other projects. He's retired because they were going to clean it up and close it down. He's retiring at West Valley from his career as a nuclear engineer. They have not been successful there, and it's a real problem. What you're talking about is it could be scary.
Yeah, we're leaving these legacies around. That we talked about the water in Fukushima. The water table is flowing through those, melted down cores.
That's right.
It keeps going right to the ocean.
That's
So
right.
it's already getting down to the ocean and spreading through the aquifer. How do you clean that up?
You don't. You can't.
Yeah. So
it's not.
why the hell is the administration talking about building nuclear power? It just makes no sense.
That's true.
Yeah. Well, these guys are avoiding renewables by the plague. I've always been convinced that nuclear power is really just a stalking horse for the fossil fuel industry, and that and for the nuclear weapons industry, and that part of its function in their minds has been to prevent renewables from encroaching on fossil fuels.
Yeah, I think one of the points you had in your 80 reasons to shut down nuclear power, you mentioned the Paley Commission.
Right.
That was set up by the Truman administration. They were worried about running out of oil, and they came back with the recommendation to the Eisenhower administration. Solar was the energy future.
Right.
And instead, Eisenhower chose atoms for peace, and we were told it'd be too cheap to meter.
Right.
And I read about that in my weekly reader in elementary school. And,
well, here's the great irony. The great irony is actually we have electricity that's too cheap to meter that's coming from the windmills in Texas, because they have so much wind-generated electricity in Texas, which is by far, by the way, way ahead of any other state. I think the second state in the country for wind power is Iowa, and Texas is like 4 or 5 times more. So at night in West Texas, they have so much generated electricity from the windmills that it's free. You can run your TV and your washing machine and charge your car all at night in Texas and pay zero for electricity. So we have had the dream of power too cheap to meter, but it came from windmills. I will say also that the nuclear power industry has always been a stalking horse for the nuclear weapons industry. And,
yes.
It was a pretty face to paint on the atomic bomb and to give the Atomic Energy Commission another realm of business. But and all these other countries that are buying nuclear power plants are buying them for bombs, like India and Pakistan. And that's really where it's at and where it's been at. And that's why Eisenhower went with the peaceful atom. It didn't have anything to do with peaceful atom. It had to do with the nuclear weapons industry.
And to keep the supply chain open, so that you have more, that you then that goes
Right.
not only just for equipment, but also for trained personnel.
So the way we discourage developing countries from turning to nuclear is to promote renewables. And the number one issue is the grid. Countries in Africa, they're so-called underdeveloped. You can take a solar panel into a village and change the village overnight, get everybody light and get everybody cooking, and listening, doing their laptops, for God's sakes, and not build a grid. So it's really the grid that's the big stumbling block. A lot of these countries want the nukes for the weapon stuff. But the number one way to discourage developing countries from going nuclear is just get them renewables. And it's primarily solar panels. Windmills require a grid, I mean, although there's a wonderful film out, I can't remember the name of it. A kid, a teenager in a town, a village in Africa, they had to go miles and miles to get water. And he saw in Popular Mechanics, an old Popular Mechanics, a windmill. And he decided to build a windmill in his town, and they did it. With just, scrap Rube Goldberg stuff. And it's a wonderful film. I wish I never remember. Just Google kid builds a windmill in his town in Africa. It's really cool. But that's how they stop them. It's just put solar in there.
Yeah, and the U.S. should be paying for that. In response to the Biden plan, a group of environmental groups like Friends of the Earth and Greenpeace came out with what they called the Fair Shares Nationally Determined Contribution. Nationally determined contribution is what we do under the Paris Agreement. And they said instead of 50% by 2030, we should do 195%
yes,
by 2030.
Exactly. Yeah.
That meant 70% domestically and 105% internationally, because we're building renewables, restoring habitat. And that is not just climate debt reparations. That's an investment in the habitability of the planet for all of us.
Right.
There's nothing in Biden's plan about the international dimensions of this climate emergency,
Right.
which is a huge gap.
And I love that this fascist creep in Brazil, Bolsonaro, and somewhere there's a great movie called Democracy, At the Edge of Democracy. It's really worth watching. At the Edge of Democracy. Absolutely infuriating about how Bolsonaro came to power. So he has now come forward and said that he will save the Amazon if we give him $20 billion. And the problem is nobody trusts him. It'd be a bargain to give him $20 billion to save the Amazon, but nobody thinks he'll do it.
Yeah, it's true.
Anyway, so this has been great, Howie. Thank you so much for this.
Hey, thanks for coming on.
Marilyn, thank you.
Marilyn.
It's a great day.
Good to see you, Harvey. I haven't seen you in a long time.
No, it's been a while. And come on our election protection. Howie is one of the stars of our election protection Zoom call. It's go to just email me, solartopia@gmail. I'll send you the link, solartopia@gmail. I'll send you the link to the election protection. And I got to say that the Green Party has been a major player in all this, and we'd be way behind where we are now on election protection if it wasn't for the Green Party. So please join Howie and me on this Monday call, and please everybody contact Marilyn and have her tell you the magic for shutting a nuclear plant.
No magic, but a lot of time and a lot of hard work. And yes, I'd be happy to talk to anybody that's interested in organizing, because that's what I've been doing. So that would be, yes, you can reach me at Elie, E-L-I-E, Westcan @gmail.com. Google my name. There's a contact.
Great.
And we're going to have the next podcast on Saturday, May Day, where I'm going to talk about the green as well as red traditions of May Day.
Yeah.
Before there was a workers' movement and a red tradition, there was May Day, first day of spring.
The
The
maypole.
green tradition.
That's right.
Everybody
That's right.
running around the maypole. That's right.
Yeah, and they're linked by the dispossession of people from the land and their tools of production. So you got to bring those traditions together to repossess the earth on behalf of the people and a sustainable future. So I'm going to talk more about that on Saturday. And you can find us on the Facebook page and the Twitter for the exact link. And so that's the next episode. So
Good.
Thank you.
Looking forward to it.
you.
Howie, thank you so much for this
We'll see you in
conversation.
Solartopia.
Yes.
yep,
And Colin Kaepernick will be our quarterback.
he should be playing.
He absolutely should be. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right,
All
you
right.
guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks again.
Take
Bye,
care,
everybody.